dialer is Ms. Timekeeper. The adjudicator is Miss Banfield, and the topic for our debate is that parking spaces for prams is unnecessary. The affirmative team seated to my right is from Pembroke, and the negative team seated to my left is from Pembroke. The speaking time from this debate is 4 minutes, and a single warning bell will sound 1 minute before the speaking time, and a double bell will sound at the speaking time. Double bell will sound at the speaking time. A continuous bell may be rung 30 seconds after the speaking time, in which case the speaker must sit down immediately. Please ensure that your mobile phones and other electronic devices are switched off. I declare this debate open and call upon the first affirmative speaker, Conrad Stocksmith.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to this exciting quarter-final debate. May the best score win. Oh, forgot about that. Tonight's topic is that parking spaces with prams is unnecessary. As the affirmative, we will demonstrate this conclusively. We've defined the topic as prams, an abbreviation of the word preambulator, a carriage for a baby, normally pushed by a person. A parking space is a location designated for parking, and a pram parking space is usually close to an entrance of a venue and may be larger in size. We define unnecessary as something that is not needed and non-essential. So this topic is that spaces reserved for pram parking are inessential or not needed. Ladies and gentlemen, it's important tonight that you keep in mind we are not, and I repeat not, saying that these types of parking spaces should be banned. We are only saying that they are not necessary. As first speaker, I will show how these parking spaces are necessary on legal grounds. I will also demonstrate how it can be discriminatory and open to misuse. Our second speaker, Kai, will focus on convenience and safety, while our third speaker, Nicholas, will counter negative and sum up our team's case. Ladies and gentlemen, my first argument is a clear legal one. Pram parking spots are offered as a courtesy, not as a necessity. They are not legally enforceable under any law or regulation. This is backed up by evidence from the NRMA, Australia's largest car agency. This demonstrates that unlike disabled parking spaces, for example, they are not deemed necessary. They are usually provided by shopping centres to attract customers. This is about their bottom line, not about essential help. We don't deny that these parking spaces may seem desirable. I mean, who wants to juggle kids and a pram when the excitement of shopping is ahead? But to suggest this is necessary is a fallacy. My second point is that these spaces can be discriminatory. They've resulted in Australians with physical needs being discriminated against. An article from the Courier Mail shows that pram parking spaces are taking up disability spaces in local car parks. Blue Badge Insurance has stated, I quote, "While making life easier for prams is a good thing, disability parking permit holders find it frustrating when the courtesy spaces significantly outnumber disability access parking. It doesn't seem fair. And ladies and gentlemen, it isn't. We note there are people that might be deserving of the space, such as pregnant women, but because she doesn't have a pram, these spots are not available to her. That just shows how arbitrary this issue can be. My final argument is these spaces are not only unnecessary, but they are open to blatant misuse. There's nothing to prevent a person without a pram or infant parking in a pram spot. Evidence ranging from websites such as bigfooty.com to Reddit to Essential Kids are littered with examples of people without prams using these spaces. It's caused a new form of car park rage. You heard it here first. Tonight, we need to think with our heads and our hearts. As much as we like the idea of reserved spaces for people with prams, they are not necessary. I've shown how they are not necessary legally because they're not enforceable, and how they can be misused and can discriminate against those who really need them. Parking spaces for prams are not necessary. Thank you.
I call upon the first native speaker, Cindy Shi.
Good evening, Mr. Madam Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that parking spaces for prams is unnecessary. We agree with the definition given by the opposition. However, we define unnecessary as not essential in any circumstance. We believe our definition is more appropriate because the definition given by the opposition is incomplete. Cambridge Dictionary defines unnecessary as not essential in any circumstance. Therefore, we believe that larger parking spaces for pregnant women and families with small children are not unnecessary. Rather, they have many benefits. Tonight, as first speaker, I'll be talking to you about the benefits of pram parking spaces, as well as how having these pram parks upholds an integral fairness aspect towards children and parents of society. Our second speaker will be talking to you about the huge safety concept that these parking spaces commit to for the well-being of small children themselves and also for fellow drivers. Our third speaker will rebut and sum up our team case. The first affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that parking spaces are discriminatory. As sourced from Roads and Motorists Association Limited, there is no law to prevent a person without a pram or infant parking in a pram spot. Legally speaking, anyone can park in a parking spot with pram space. While pram parking spaces are not at all enforceable by law, owners allocate these pram parking spots on the basis that we as customers respect and use common courtesy and public trust to steer clear of these spots and leave them for people that really need it. Tonight I'll be discussing the benefits of pram parking spaces and the fairness aspect of these parks. This is why pram parking spaces are not unnecessary at all, and they are actually beneficial, also a positive addition to many communities around the world. Many people believe that these pram parking spaces are just closer to entrances, making them more convenient, though there is obviously more to it. These spaces have been made inside so that all car doors can be opened to a full extent, allowing parents to get prams and, more importantly, children out of cars more easily. According to an Australian government website, the normal parking bay size is 2.4 metres wide. However, a standard Australian car is around 1.8 metres wide, leaving only 0.6 metres of room between you and the car next to you. This means on each side you get a maximum of 2 rulers length to open doors. Imagine trying to take a pram, let alone a child, out of such a small space. A survey from the Sunshine Coast newspaper found that 93% of parents struggle to get their children out of the car safely because there simply isn't enough room. And 72% of pregnant women said they put a lot of pressure on their bump as they got in and out of tightly parked vehicles. Pram parking spaces are therefore perfect solutions as they are 3.2 metres wide and 5.4 metres long, being larger and allowing much more freedom of movement as well as convenience. My second point is that there is a factor of fairness that we must address when labelling pram parking spaces as unnecessary. According to Cambridge Dictionary, fairness is treating people equally or in a way that is right. Similar to disabled parking spaces, pram parks cater for the special needs of certain people with certain needs. Pram pushers and pregnant women are at a disadvantage compared to standard shoppers because they are physically less able. During the later trimesters, women will find it increasingly harder to move, and overexerting themselves will have negative effects on the baby they are carrying. So by continuing to not make pram parking spaces unnecessary, we are doing a favour for the less able, making their overall experience easier and more enjoyable so all members of the community have equal accessibility. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we the negative team know that parking spaces for prams are not unnecessary as they have many benefits, and there is an essential fairness factor that we as a society must regard and adhere to. Thank you.
I call upon the second affirmative speaker, Cass Beebe.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that parking spaces for prams is unnecessary. We, the affirmative team, strongly believe with this statement. The negative team has tried to tell you that these car parks allow convenience of space. This is wrong. Just because something is convenient does not mean it is necessary. Have you noticed how often these spaces are empty? That's because non-working parents with kids know the best time to shop is from late morning to mid-afternoon when it's not busy, as stated by thekitchen.com. The negative team has also tried to tell you that it is fair to have these parking spaces. It is not a disability to have a parent with a pram. These pram spaces would be far better allocated to our ever-increasing ageing population with mobility issues. Dr. Jane Flynn Clinton states the number of people who now qualify for disabled permits far outstrips available disabled spots. Remember, for your special privilege and convenience, someone else carries the load, in this case those with disabilities. Our first speaker, Conrad, has already explained that we need to consider fairness when allocating special parking spaces. He also spoke about accommodating others with different needs and misuse. I will be discussing 3 points. My first point outlines the safety in car parks. It's wrong to think that parking spaces for prams is necessary for safety reasons. A child secured in a pram being transported through a car park is a lot safer than a young child walking with their parent, who at any time could run away like Usain Bolt. Therefore, if you're allocating these spaces for safety concerns, you're picking the wrong group. Also, there are already many rules in the car park, such as the speed limits, as well as signage telling drivers to look out for young children. I would like to point out that these car parks are right next to the entrance, probably the highest traffic area in a car park, where cars enter locations from a where this competition for spaces is maximum. This is surely one of the worst locations from a safety perspective. If a car park safety were a major community concern, then surely car park management and designers need to make the whole car park safe, not just a few car parks. Also, if safety was an issue, then government would enshrine these parks in legislation Australia-wide. Currently, the spaces are a courtesy of the complex management. In fact, I suspect they are more about marketing than safety, making people come and spend money. My second point speaks about the so-called convenience of these spaces. Although parents may find them convenient, let's remember, as I've already stated, just because something is convenient does not mean it is necessary, especially if it's only convenient for a small number of people. Both Mel Hurst from Kidspot.com and Nama Winston from Mamamia.com state, when did having a child in a pram become such a task that it required a special space? Yes, kids kick at doors. Yes, they wriggle as you try and strap them in. And yes, the pram sometimes makes a wonky, drunken bid for freedom from behind the boot. It just seems like the everyday stuff that we should be able to get on with. As the majority of these spaces will be utilised by mothers, it also strikes me as somewhat patronising for women. Somehow they can't cope with the task of shopping without these special spaces. The parks are not required for children either. They are overprotective. Dr. Jane Finn Clinton, journalist and teacher, agrees. Children need to learn the way of the car park and not have the car park moulded around them. My third and final point looks at the consequences of these spaces. Because legally anyone can use them, there is a culture of abuse, yelling and hooting in car parks from outraged parents when these spaces are used by people without prams. This vermin hostility can take the form of vandalising cars and posting photos online. This would not occur if these spaces didn't exist. These arguments are not needed, not essential, provide no real gain, proving that these spaces are unnecessary. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, we the Affirmative team strongly believe that parking spaces for prams are completely unnecessary. They are not required from a safety aspect, as I've already proved, and yes, they are convenient for a small cohort, but definitely not necessary. These spaces would be far better utilised and suited by the ever-increasing disabled population, and the removal would rid our car parks of a group of hostile, self-righteous shoppers. Thank you.
I now call upon the second negative speaker, Georgie Lewis.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for tonight's debate is that parking spaces for prams is unnecessary. We, the negative team, strongly believe that this statement is false. The second affirmative speaker has tried to tell you that pram parking spaces, just being convenient, are still not necessary. This is incorrect because parking pram spaces might seem unnecessary to some people, but for others it really matters. As our first speaker has stated, we are not debating that it is essential to have pram parking, but it is not unnecessary, as the opposition says. Many people, apart from disabled people, need wider spaces for various reasons, such as the fact that they may have a baby bump from being pregnant, need to push a pram around the car, or how it is simply not safe for children to wait in front of the car next to traffic, as the sides are too narrow to fit them. The difference between mere convenience and what is unnecessary is that convenience always has a second option. The thing is, these parents with prams and infants or pregnant women do not have a second option. With standard-sized, narrow parking spaces, pregnant women would not be able to manoeuvre their way around the sides of cars to get to the designated seat. As sourced from KidSpot, one pregnant woman had to resort to climbing through the side of the passenger door as there was slightly more space there, putting unavoidable pressure on her bum. She described the event as horrific, and she hopes that no other woman has to experience this as well. Are you suggesting that this is what every pregnant woman does in this situation? As well as this, what about pram pushers? How can they open the door, let alone open it to its full extent, strap the children with a pram on the side? Just because they are minorities doesn't mean that what they need is insignificant. It may seem unnecessary for us, but for them it's simply not. Our first speaker has already discussed the huge number of benefits that pram parking spaces offer, and how fairness, as an integral human value, pushes us to cater for people with specific needs. This demonstrates that parking spaces for prams is not unnecessary, and that it is in fact an important need. Tonight I will be talking to you about how pram parking spaces embrace the significant safety factor that is highly valued by everyone in every community, and how it is simply not an option for people who have a significantly larger responsibility to be publicly overlooked and deemed less important. According to sources such as the National Roads and Motorists Association and the Sunshine Coast Daily magazine, it is reasonable that parents with children, as well as senior drivers, need ease of access more than regular drivers. These parking spaces are generally slightly larger than a standard parking space and also located closer to the destination. The slight increase in size has proven to be extremely useful to parents with multiple children to look after and keep track of, as nobody wants any more accidents regarding a small and innocent child who has been left alone due to an occupied parent in the parking lot simply trying to remove their child from the vehicle. One mother has stated that she simply wouldn't be able to cope without these parking spaces, and that they provide her with some reassurance that her children will remain under her control while she is trying to account for all of them. What this says is that the safety of children everywhere is dependent on the attention of the parent with them, and that will be a lot more limited if the parents in question are spending more time on just getting children out of the car safely than focusing on them amongst ongoing traffic. Studies show that over 500 children under the age of 12 are dying each year due to the unsafe and unpredictable situations that children are being exposed to in traffic in their everyday lives, furthermore proving why these parking spaces are unnecessary. By using these allocated pram parking spots, it also helps reduce the amount of damage done to neighbouring cars when removing children from the cars that they're in, which is another reason why these parking spaces are necessary. Do we really want every single car surrounding one with children to be risking a casualty? Thank you.
I now call upon the third affirmative speaker, Nicholas Seltzer, please.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic of tonight's debate is that parking for prams is unnecessary. We, the affirmative team, strongly and indefinitely agree with this statement. Now I'll begin with my rebuttal. The first negative speaker has tried to tell you that pram parks have benefits. This is wrong because they only benefit one group of people, people with prams. What about pregnant mothers? They don't have prams, but they're not allowed to use these spaces. What about the disabled people who aren't allowed to use these spaces? What about the general public like us, who aren't allowed to use these spaces? Therefore, this is unnecessary because it does not benefit everyone. The first negative has also tried to tell you that pram parks are fair. This is incorrect because they are not fair for people with special needs and for the general public. Also, when the first speaker tried to rebut our first affirmative speaker, she said that pram parks are subjective and are not regulated. This contradicted her first point because she said they are fair. But how are they fair if they're not fair to the people who are meant to be using them? The first and second negative speakers have also said that space is required. I understand that parents need wider space to help manoeuvring the prams and kids. However, why not have generic wide parks in the less crowded areas of a shopping centre? Therefore, they would be convenient for other users and convenient for the mothers. The second negative has also said that pregnant mothers with prams find it hard to get out of the car. If you're shopping with a pram, you need to be careful and sensible about what you're doing when you're getting out of the car. This is not the car park's fault, it is just about the mother's fault. If they think about where they're parking, all this trouble can be avoided. And the pram won't have to be manoeuvred out of a tight spot. And also, if these are pram parks, why are we talking about pregnant mothers? They're not meant to be using them. The second negative is also stated about stressed parents. When did we get the point that having a child in a pram was such a task? And it required its own special space. As the majority of these spaces would be utilised by mothers and parents, it strikes me as somewhat patronising a woman or a parent, conveying the message that somehow they are not able to use a normal parking space. Now to my summary. The first negative speaker, Comrade, has stated that pram parking is unnecessary on legal grounds. Evidence that supports this is from NRMA, a leading car agency in Australia. It states that pram parks are not legally enforceable under any law or regulation. His second point was that pram parking is unnecessary because it is discriminating against other people, such as people with disabilities. Evidence that supports this is an article by the Courier Mail. It stated that pram parking takes up place for disabled people in local car parks. His final point was that misuse is a major issue with pram parks. His sources were articles from websites such as Reddit. They stated that there was many cases of misuse in these parks. Now to the second speaker, Kai. He has told you that pram parks are unnecessary because it is wrong to think that parking spaces for prams are necessarily safer. A child secured in a pram is being transported through a car park, which is safe for the child. It is a lot safer than a child walking holding their parent's hand. He also stated that pram parks are usually at the front of a car park, which has more danger because people are driving through the front of a car park more often than you'll see people driving through the back. His second point was that pram parks are not convenient. His evidence supporting this is that majority of people that use these car parks are not parents with prams, but they are just pregnant mothers or people that are not actually meant to be using them. Because legally, parents are left outraged when they think that these spaces are being used by people who are not eligible. This is going to cause problems and anger. This is why we, the affirmative team, strongly believe that parking spaces for prams is unnecessary. Thank you.
I now call upon the third negative speaker, Yilin Gao.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen. The topic for our debate is that parking spaces for prams is unnecessary. We, as the negative team, undoubtedly believe this statement is false. First, let me point out a few flaws made in the affirmative team's speeches. The first affirmative speaker has tried to say that there's no point of pram parking spaces, as people in the public always misuse it. This is not a valid point as to why pram parking is unnecessary. You cannot say this just because something is misused from time to time. Believe it or not, it happens in disabled parking too. Does that make it unnecessary as well? This is simply off topic. It's the idea of pram parking that is what makes it not unnecessary, as the opposing team says. It is helping people such as people with prams and young children as well as pregnant women that truly need it. If anything, it only encourages pram parking and just for people to tighten the rules around it. Anyhow, it is much more convenient that pram parking is not a legal law enforced rule, rather a courtesy and trust given to the public that they will stay away from these parking bays and allow them for people that will really need it, as this means they do not have to issue fines nor will there be any paperwork. This all boils down to respect and civic responsibility, and like many others, this system relies on trust between the community. The second affirmative speaker has said that you need to look after your kids, not the car park being moulded around them. Sometimes people cannot be in control of their children all the time. If you were a child once, you would know this, which is, well, everyone. Sometimes they have a mind of their own, and while someone is busy loading their groceries into the car, they cannot watch their children at the same time and be able to physically stop them as well. Children do need to learn the ways of the car park in their own time and understand the dangers of it, but they can do it in a safe environment of our creation. We cannot mould the car park to suit the children, but we can at least decrease the likelihood of deaths and injuries and explain to them we are doing this to reduce the hazards. Our duty may be to teach, but who says we can't do this while protecting? The third affirmative speaker has tried to say that other people are not allowed to use these spaces. As we've said in our definition and time again in our speeches, we have already said that pregnant women can use this. As sourced from Traffic SA, there's no legal document saying that pregnant women or any other people that need wider spaces cannot use parking prams at all. As for disabled people, they can very clearly use their own special disabled parking anyway. Throughout all affirmative speakers' speeches, they have stated that just because pram parks are convenient doesn't mean that they're necessary. We have not in any way said that pram parks are necessary, just that it is not unnecessary. The first speaker from our team has talked to you about how pram parking can greatly benefit the people that really need that extra room next to their car. As sourced from Standard Traffic Rules SA, the difference between the parking lot and the car leaves only two 30-centimetre ruler spaces. At 36 weeks, a baby bump on a pregnant woman is around 45 centimetres, while a pram is around 60 centimetres. That means a pregnant woman only has 15 centimetres of space to open the door, while a pram pusher cannot even fit the pram itself onto the sidelines. Do these people need to wait for all the cars next to them to leave? However, a standard-sized pram parking bay is 3.2 metres wide. This means that a pregnant woman of 36 weeks can have around a metre to use, while a pram pusher has around 80 centimetres of room. It makes a big difference. She has also talked to you about how pram parking upholds the fairness treatment towards people in need, instead of simply forcing them away because we don't understand them. The second speaker from our team has talked to you regarding how pram parking spaces can influence the safety of children in the way of cars and motorists. Parents are spending large amounts of time focusing on how to simply get their children in and out of the car instead of watching their children with traffic. So, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, we, the negative team, strongly believe that pram parking is not unnecessary. Instead, they are greatly valued by pram pushers and pregnant women and are also a highly beneficial and safe option that people in communities need. Thank you.